Mr. Speaker, I rise to warn this body of the deteriorating conditions in the African country of Niger and to give rise to the concern of service members and contractors. More than 1,000 of them right now are functionally being held hostage in Niger. They are being used as pawns during a negotiation that has left America at the bended knee of third world criminals and thugs as our troops seek medicine and fresh water and troop rotations.
They've been called dictators, incompetent, unfit to govern. That's what the West often says about African leaders. And to be fair, sometimes they're right. Corruption, repression, and greed have plagued many governments across the continent. But here's where it gets interesting. That label doesn't apply to everyone. You see, when an African leader truly stands up for their people, when they reject foreign control, demand sovereignty, and chart an independent course, that's when the West reaches for a different set of words. Criminals. Thugs. And that's exactly what happened recently. In a stunning speech, U.S. Congressman Matt Gaetz took the floor and launched an attack that left many in Africa stunned. He didn't just criticize policy, he went for the jugular, calling President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, Colonel Assimi Goïta of Mali, and General Abdourahamane Tiani of Niger criminals and thugs. Yes, the very leaders who've captured the hearts of millions across the continent, the ones who've dared to stand against neo-colonialism, who've expelled foreign troops, rejected exploitative aid, and embraced Pan-Africanism. These are the ones being vilified, not for their failures, but for refusing to dance to Washington's tune. But Gaetz didn't stop at insults. He went further, spewing demeaning remarks about the people of Niger, mocking their leadership, and even hinting at possible military action. The message was loud and clear. If you don't play by the West's rules, you'll be labeled an enemy. Sound familiar? It's the same script used against Gaddafi, against Thomas Sankara, against every African leader who dared to imagine a future without foreign strings attached. So, what exactly did Congressman Gaetz say, and why has it sparked such outrage across Africa? Let's break it down. We've all heard about how France was humiliated, how the AES nations, along with Chad and Senegal, one by one, expelled French troops from their soil. It was a historic moment, a break from colonial shadows. But what we don't talk about enough is that the United States got humiliated too. Yes, the US military, arguably the most powerful force on the planet, was told to pack up and leave. And it wasn't because their mission ended. It wasn't a polite handshake. It was a forced eviction. For the first time in African history, a nation didn't wait for Washington to finish its business. Niger made the decision for them. When General Abdourahamane Tiani took power, he looked around and asked the one question no African leader had dared ask aloud. What exactly are US troops doing here? After all, Niger was plagued with insecurity, insurgencies, and terror attacks, even with the largest and most expensive US drone base in the entire Sahel right in its backyard. So what was the point? What were these foreign forces actually achieving? The answer was clear: nothing. And so, in a move that stunned Washington and shook the Pentagon, Niger's leadership kicked the Americans out. No excuses, no backdoor deals, just a bold declaration of sovereignty. The message was unmistakable. If you're not helping us, you're not staying. It was a blow to US foreign policy, a direct challenge to its presence in Africa, a moment of undeniable humiliation. And for once, the world saw that Africa could do what many thought impossible: stand up to a superpower and say, enough. Just recently, the topic of Niger made its way into the halls of US Congress, and what followed wasn't diplomacy, it was a meltdown, a moment where frustration, arrogance, and something far darker all boiled to the surface. A US congressman, visibly agitated, rose to the podium and unleashed a tirade that left no room for misinterpretation. "I rise to warn this body," he began, "of the deteriorating conditions in the African country of Niger. Thousands of our service members and contractors are being held hostage. They are being used as pawns by third world criminals and thugs. Our troops seek medicine and fresh water." Let's take a moment to absorb that. He just accused Niger's military leadership, President Tiani and the AES alliance, of holding Americans hostage, and worse, labeled them third world criminals and thugs. That wasn't just policy criticism. That was pure, unapologetic contempt. Listen closely to the tone, to the language. It reeks of colonial arrogance, of a time when Africa was treated not as a partner, but as a problem to be dominated. It was the voice of a man who couldn't accept that a small African nation had stood up and said, "No more." But let's be honest, this isn't new. This is how the West truly sees Africa. Not as equals, not as sovereign states, but as uncivilized, disposable, and defiant pests to be put in their place. That's the real view behind the polished speeches and diplomatic smiles. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part? Some African leaders still can't see it. Or worse, they choose not to. Whether it's out of greed, cowardice, or a desperate desire for Western approval, they bend the knee again and again. They shake hands with those who insult their people. They accept deals that sell off their nation's soul. And then they smile for the cameras. It's not just shameful, it's tragic. But Niger chose a different path. And maybe that's why the insults are louder, the threats more desperate, because the West is watching its grip on Africa slip, one sovereign decision at a time. The congressman didn't stop at insults. He doubled down, this time with fear, with drama, with a narrative designed to stir outrage. He claimed that 1,100 Americans were now endangered in Niger, U.S. military personnel and contractors, caught in a standoff not of their making. And in assigning blame, he pointed fingers not at the government of Niger, but at his own. Antony Blinken, he said, proclaimed Niger a model of democracy, a prime location where America could execute its African strategy. But just a year later, the government Blinken praised was gone, overthrown by soldiers trained by the very same United States. And here's the twist. Those same soldiers, the new leaders of Niger, no longer wanted America's presence. They wanted the troops gone. They wanted the $100 million drone base dismantled. They wanted US power out. Imagine that. Billions in American taxpayer dollars invested just to be shown the door. To the congressman, this wasn't just an embarrassment. It was betrayal. And he wasn't done. He claimed that Niger's military leadership was using the health of American soldiers as leverage, that flight restrictions had made it impossible to deliver medicine, that families trying to send basic supplies were being extorted by Nigerian officials. And just when the tension peaked, he delivered his final accusation. Russia is behind it all. No evidence, no nuance, just the familiar Cold War playbook. If an African country resists the West, blame Russia. But here's the truth the speech didn't mention. What really happened was that Niger asserted its sovereignty. They didn't kidnap Americans. They didn't shut the door to peace. They simply said, "We no longer want foreign troops on our soil." Is that a crime? To the West, apparently, yes. Especially when it comes from Africa. Especially when it disrupts their carefully crafted strategy of influence and control. And so, the narrative is twisted. Sovereign decisions become threats. National pride becomes criminal defiance. And every rejection of Western presence is repackaged as a Russian conspiracy. But the people are watching, and they're waking up. Because the real story here isn't about endangered Americans. It's about an endangered system. A Western system of control that's finally being challenged by a continent that's tired of being told what to do. Well, Matt Gaetz is a U.S. congressman representing Florida's 1st District. He is known for his strong support of U.S. President Donald Trump and is a prominent figure in the Republican Party. His career has, however, been marked by numerous controversies, including an ongoing federal investigation into allegations of sex trafficking and corruption. In addition, Matt Gaetz has also faced scrutiny for his inflammatory remarks and political stances, such as his opposition to the COVID-19 mitigation measures and his endorsement of Trump's election fraud allegations. Not surprisingly, he has also been criticized for his racial remarks and his connection to far-right groups. However, despite the controversy surrounding him, Gaetz has remained an influential figure in American politics since his election to the House of Representatives since 2016. With this background, you can understand the kind of person Matt Gaetz is, and it wouldn't really shock you that someone like him would say something like that. Listen to the tone and language of his voice in the video. It was downright condescending. Using words like the Third World implies that countries in Africa such as Niger, the people and leaders in those countries are beneath the US. For Gaetz, the American soldiers stationed in Niger are more important than the citizens of Niger. Yet, US officials are the same people that preach human rights, equality, and justice. Every human, whether from the US or from a third world country, is important and should be treated equally. Now, Gaetz spoke about how the American forces in Niger were in danger simply because Niger shut down its airspace. As a sovereign country, Niger had the right to do whatever it wants to do to protect its interests. It's a similar thing that the US has done since its existence. So, why has it become a crime for Niger to protect itself? This is the double standard we are talking about. On the international stage, a crime is only committed when it is carried out by African or non-Western leaders. But here's the twist the congressman didn't mention. The situation he raged about, the so-called hostage crisis, wasn't created by Niger. It was created by the United States military itself. You see, this fallout didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the result of a deep, simmering disrespect, one that finally boiled over when US officials sat across from Nigerian leaders and tried to dictate who Niger could and could not partner with. And they didn't do it with diplomacy. They did it with condescension. That's when Niger said, "Enough." In a televised announcement that sent shockwaves through international corridors, Colonel Abdourahamane, the official spokesperson for Niger's ruling junta, took the mic and dropped a bombshell. Niger was terminating the counterterrorism agreement with the United States, the very agreement that had kept US troops and contractors on Nigerian soil since 2012. His words were clear. The decision was not impulsive, it was deliberate, a response to years of violated sovereignty, tone-deaf arrogance, and a total disregard for Niger's constitutional values. And for the US military establishment, it was a shock. They never expected a small African nation to revoke the privilege of their presence. They never imagined a country that had long been seen as strategic would dare close the door. But Niger did, and they did it publicly, with full confidence. So how did the United States respond? Not by leaving, not by respecting the decision of a sovereign state, but by stalling, delaying, searching for loopholes, any back channel or justification to remain in Niger despite being told to leave. Typical of US foreign policy, when they're welcomed, they stay. When they're told to go, they find a way to stay anyway. And that's what made Congressman Matt Gaetz's threat even more absurd, because the real aggressor in this story wasn't Niger, it was the superpower that couldn't accept being told no. Let's get one thing straight. Niger is a sovereign nation. It has every right, every legal, moral, and constitutional right to protect its territory, its resources, and its future. And that's exactly what it did. When the US tried to dictate terms, when they ignored Niger's warnings, when they spoke in condescending tones that echoed a colonial past, Niger didn't fold. It ended the agreement, clearly, publicly, and without apology. So what did the United States do? They refused to leave. Instead of respecting Niger's decision, US military officials stalled, delayed, stayed put on the very soil they were no longer welcome on. And so, Niger responded the only way a sovereign state could, by restricting operations at the US base. No missions, no patrols, no movement in or out. It was a quiet but firm push. You are no longer authorized to operate here. You are guests who overstayed your welcome. And Niger was absolutely within its rights. But then came the twist. Instead of holding US military leadership accountable for placing their troops in a situation they were told to exit from, Matt Gaetz turned the blame toward Niger. He accused the very government that had clearly asked them to leave of creating hardship for the American troops. The Pentagon failed to pull its people out. The Pentagon failed to secure logistics. The Pentagon failed to respect international decisions. But somehow, it was Niger's fault that US soldiers couldn't access medicine or mail. How does that make sense? Gaetz didn't condemn the chain of command. He didn't question why US military brass ignored a sovereign nation's demand. Instead, he scapegoated the very people who were asserting their independence. Why? Because in the eyes of men like Gaetz, Africa still doesn't have the right to say no, still doesn't have the right to defend its land. But Niger didn't just say no, it enforced it, and that's what really shook them. But instead of asking the obvious question, why hasn't the US military packed up and left? Matt Gaetz chose to do something else entirely. He issued a threat, not a diplomatic warning, not a measured critique, a threat of military intervention against Niger's leaders, their homes, and even their families, all because a sovereign African nation dared to exercise its right to choose who stays on its soil. The tone was condescending, the language was appalling, and the message was clear. The West doesn't see African leaders as equals. They see them as obstacles, as pawns, as people who must be punished if they don't comply, because the only part of Africa they truly value is its resources, its uranium, its gold, its oil, its rare earth minerals. That's what keeps them interested. That's what keeps them here. It's not about freedom, not about security. It's never been about democracy. It's always been about control. And just when you thought the speech couldn't get any more absurd, Gaetz pulled out the old propaganda card, Russia. Yes, somehow, in his mind, Russia was behind all of it. Never mind the facts. Never mind that Niger made its decision independently. Never mind that the people of the Sahel have repeatedly said the same thing. We are tired of foreign soldiers. Gaetz's narrative wasn't about truth. It was about deflection, projection, a desperate attempt to preserve the illusion of American strength in a region where the tide is turning. Because now, the military leaders of the Sahel are speaking with one voice. From Burkina Faso to Mali to Niger, the message is simple. The Western military presence is over, and it's not hard to see why. Years of drone strikes, special ops, and so-called counter-terrorism missions have failed to bring peace. If anything, insecurity has worsened. Terror cells have grown. Entire regions remain destabilized. So what good has the West's military presence done? That's the question leaders like Traoré, Goïta, and Tiani are finally asking. And more importantly, they're answering it with action. The era of military occupation masquerading as partnership is ending, and Africa is waking up. The truth is, the arrogance we heard in Matt Gaetz's voice isn't new. It's the same mindset, the same poisonous superiority that fueled colonization in the first place. Back then, they said Africa had no history, no civilization, no culture worth preserving. African beliefs? Barbaric. African traditions? Primitive. And so, under the banner of civilizing the savages, they invaded, occupied, and plundered. They said it was about education, about salvation, but in reality, it was about gold, diamonds, land, and power. And now, decades later, they tell us colonization is over, that Africa is free, that we're independent nations. But look closer. African countries may no longer wave Western flags, but the systems, the agreements, the financial traps, and the military outposts remain. The same patronizing tone, the same power dynamic, the same control. It's all still here, just in a suit and tie instead of a soldier's uniform. Because the truth is, colonization never ended. It just evolved. They replaced missionaries with NGOs, gunboats with aid programs, colonial administrators with advisors, and flags. Well, they just let us design our own, while pulling the strings from behind closed doors. The West still sees Africa as inferior, as a continent to be managed, corrected, exploited. And worst of all, they built systems that ensured Africa would remain beneath them by design. Economic frameworks, trade deals, currency dependencies, military alliances, every piece of the puzzle crafted to keep Africa in a permanent state of waiting, begging, submitting. But now, that system is being challenged by voices that no longer whisper, by leaders who no longer bow, by nations who remember what true freedom feels like. And Africa is rising. Think about the International Court of Justice, for example. Who do you think it was created for? If you think that it was a court to try every country regarding international crimes such as genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and aggression, think again. Recall that South Africa made headlines earlier this year when it took Israel to the International Court of Justice, accusing it of commuting genocide in Pakistan. After several months of court cases, the International Court of Justice finally charged Israel of genocide, legitimizing South Africa's allegations. When the International Criminal Court charged Israel with genocide and issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant, the world was stunned. The court also called for a halt to Israel's assault on Rafah, a bold, unprecedented move. But instead of support, the ICC faced fury, not just from Israel and Hamas, but from the United States and the UK. In a threatening letter, US senators warned, "Target Israel, and we will target you." They vowed to cut off funding, sanction ICC officials, and even ban them and their families from entering the US. The letter ended with one chilling sentence: "You have been warned." So much for justice, because clearly, international law only applies when it's not aimed at Western allies. And here's where the hypocrisy reaches its peak. The same United States and United Kingdom that are now threatening the ICC, they were cheering it on just months earlier, when the court issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin and Russia's Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova, following the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Back then, the ICC was applauded, respected, legitimate. But now that it's not targeting a rival, now that it's coming for one of their own, suddenly the court is corrupt. Suddenly it's overreaching. Suddenly it must be punished. How convenient. How utterly hypocritical. But that's not even the most shocking part. In a rare and sobering interview, ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan opened up about the intense backlash. Speaking plainly, he confirmed that the letter from the US wasn't just pressure, it was a threat. And then, he revealed something that peeled back the mask entirely. "Of course," Khan said, "I've had some elected leaders speak to me and be very blunt. This court is built for Africa and for thugs like Putin," was what one senior leader told me. This court is built for Africa and thugs like Putin. They didn't even try to hide it. Though he didn't name names, we know exactly where that language comes from. Western leaders. The same ones who smile on global stages and preach about human rights, yet behind closed doors, they admit the truth. International justice was never meant for them. It was designed to control the rest of the world, especially Africa. If an African nation is accused of war crimes, the ICC is empowered, active, and relentless. But when it comes to the West, or its allies, the ICC becomes toothless, powerless, afraid. It's a pattern we've seen over and over again. The West has built a system, a global order, that places itself above the law, while using that same law to punish those who oppose its interests. If a country aligns with the West, it's labeled a democracy, even if it violates every human right in the book. But if a country resists, it's called a dictatorship. Its leaders are demonized, its economy is sanctioned, its people suffer. Ask Russia, ask China, ask any African country that dares to step outside the script. This isn't about justice, it's about control, and the illusion of justice used to maintain it. The same US and UK that celebrated the ICC's arrest warrant for Putin in 2022 are now turning their backs on the court, just because it targeted Israel. But here's what's truly shocking. In a recent interview, ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan revealed that a senior elected leader told him bluntly, "This court is built for Africa and thugs like Putin." Think about that. The ICC wasn't built for justice. It was built for control, to go after Africans and anyone who defies Western power. Because when it's an African country under fire, the court moves fast. But when it's the US or its allies, the rules suddenly don't apply. It's the same system we've seen for decades, where the West stays on top, defining the laws, enforcing the punishments, and silencing those who resist. If a nation dares to think independently, they're called dictatorships and slapped with sanctions. So, what's the solution? Africa needs strong, united, and patriotic leadership. Leaders who won't bow to foreign pressure. If the continent stands together to dismantle the systems the West created, Africa could become the most powerful continent on Earth. And maybe that future is closer than we think. Because now, under President Trump, the US is starting to pull back. They're closing embassies, cutting off USAID, and even considering dismantling AFRICOM, their military command in Africa. Good, let it end. Africa must now focus on building itself, on its terms, with its people, and for its future. But what do you think? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe for more untold truths about Africa and the world.